Home and a family, but family. I never thought homelessness would happen to me. I had a good job, a home and a family, but family violence took it all away.
At 16, I left home to escape violence. I couch surfed, slept on floors, sometimes on the street.
In my small country town, there was nowhere to hide. One night at 3 a.m, I walked out in my pyjamas with just my phone, charger and teddy bear.
Once, my bag ripped open at Flinders Street Station. Everything I owned spilled out. No one asked if I was okay. No one offered to help. People just stared.
I didn't see myself as homeless at first. I wasn't on the streets. I was going from friend to friend's house, studying for Year 12 exams while constantly sick and anxious.
I had a stable job and rental. Then my hours were reduced, my car broke down, and medical bills piled up. I couldn't pay rent. Now I sleep on a friend's couch, and I feel very tired and never truly rested.
I came from a middle-class background. This should never have happened to me, but it did.
The biggest support a community can offer is recognising that people experiencing homelessness are people first.
We just need stability, understanding, and a fair chance.
Homelessness can happen to anyone.
But with support, patience, and compassion,
We can rebuild, we can thrive.
And we can change the story.
Thank you everyone for joining us today, a very special webinar in the week of International Women's Day. The hidden workforce, family and domestic violence, homelessness and women at work. A lot to unpack today, but I did want to get started by acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you today from the Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I know there is a lot of people dialing in from around Australia in different corners of our beautiful country, and I wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from whichever part of the country that you are dialing in from today, and recognise the deep and continuing connections that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people hold to their lands. Today's panel is presented by Home for All Foundation. The Home for All Foundation exists to galvanise the property industry into collective action that accelerates solutions to homelessness. Launching in September last year, the foundation raised an incredible over $1 million in their first fundraising campaign. And a lot of people on this call were a huge driver and a contributor of that. And we will be announcing the recipients of that first round of fundraising soon. So please stay tuned for that. It's really exciting. My name is Natalie Hortz, and I am the Head of Organisational Development for the Ray White Group, as well as a member of the advisory group of a Home for All Foundation. And it is my absolute honour to be sitting here today, not only representing the foundation and the wonderful people behind it, but to be sitting here and joined by three incredible women. Those are Donna Stolzenberg, CEO of the National Homelessness Collective and 2021 Victorian Australian of the Year. Cara Gleeson, Director, Our Watch Institute and Prevention and Action, and Sky, a lived experience advocate from the Big Issues Women's Workforce, and the wonderful Kirsty from the Big Issue is here to support as well. Together over the next hour, we're going to be discussing the connection between family and domestic violence and homelessness, how violence and housing insecurity impact women at work, and practical ways workplaces can create safer, more supportive environments. We know that more than 53,000 Australian women experience homelessness every night without a safe or secure housing. And we know that the largest cause of homelessness in Australia are domestic and family violence, which overwhelmingly, unfortunately, affects women and children. All three of our speakers today represent organisations who are doing incredibly wonderful things to bring this to attention and, more importantly, provide those really tangible solutions to help this situation. The chat function, we should all be pretty familiar with Zoom. The chat function is available. Please put in some questions as we go. We'll make sure we get some time at the end so that you can ask those questions. But without further ado, I would love to jump in, and if I can get my panelists up on screen, let's get started. And the wonderful Donna, I'm going to start with you. Thank you so much for joining today. Donna, my first question is, I guess in 2024-25, 40% of those seeking specialist housing in Australia had experienced domestic and family violence. Can you tell us about the connection between that domestic and family violence and homelessness, and how you see violence at home driving people into this housing insecurity and homelessness?
Yeah, Natalie, thank you so much. One of the issues with domestic and family violence is the fact that it is very hidden. It's not an in-your-face thing, and there's still a lot of shame around it. And now that we have some control over our own media with social media and being able to reach organisations through things like mobile phones and apps and websites that never used to exist before, we're really now starting to see it. It's always been there, though. It's always been something that has been part of society, and the fact that it's been very hidden is one of the drivers behind it, behind why it's escalating so high. And you can't fix something that you can't see or something that you don't know about. So there's been very little funding directed towards it. Of course, there's a lot of shame around domestic and family violence as well. So when you think about, some of the catch cries of, well, what did you do to make him hit you? Why didn't you just do what you were told? Those sorts of things that sound absolutely horrifying in this day and age, but they really are. They were part of the general societal conversation. So when you look at domestic violence as being such a hidden issue, where when it's hidden and there is no support, there's nowhere to go. There's no one to help you. Yeah. We're only just starting to create spaces now and create funding now. So when the streets are safer than home, that's when people have to leave and have to go. So you can imagine how hard things must have been at home for people to, as the video said, grab a backpack and just leave, or just leave at 3 o'clock in the morning. Homelessness is not just a couple of bad choices. It's very often a very long issue that has been growing and building and creating this monster that didn't just start one day and can't be fixed in one day as well. So that's where you see a lot of that domestic violence and homelessness connection.
And I think, when we talk about the hidden element as well, I think you associate, we talked about the street and people on the street, but that's only such a small percentage of people who are indeed experiencing homelessness. And I think that's a huge part of the hidden part of this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that has shaped the narrative of what we think homelessness is. And when we look at people sitting on the street, and it's usually, usually an elderly gentleman, and people think, well, they are the only types of people that would end up becoming homeless, is someone who's old and probably has, an injury and doesn't have anywhere to go, your old grandpa type person, who's rattling a cup there. And people don't realise that is really a very small, I think, 5 to 6% of what we see out in the streets is represented by that visual. And there are different levels of homelessness. There's different tiers of homelessness. There's certainly a different language and narrative about how we speak about certain aspects of homelessness and the people who are experiencing homelessness themselves. It is anything. People think that, well, if you've got a roof over your head, then you're not homeless. Nothing could be further from the truth. And unfortunately, it has escalated to that point now that some organisations are saying, well, if you've got a car to sleep in, that's a roof, you're not homeless. It actually has gotten that bad. It really is a crisis in this country at the moment.
Yeah, which is just, I mean, it's so awful because I think it ties back to the, well, where do you feel safe? And yeah, a roof over your head in a car is not necessarily going to make you feel safe and secure. And yeah, and I think to your point about if it's hidden, it's not something that a lot of people are even aware of. So there's that education gap, and so I guess discussions such as today and the work that all of your organisations do is so incredibly important because if we're not talking about it, if we're not bringing it to light, then I think that there's that huge misunderstanding, and then it therefore like there's that opportunity or lack thereof to help or to provide solutions.
Yeah, that's true, and it really is about dropping whatever perception of homelessness you have and looking at everything with a clear slate and just thinking to yourself, perhaps it's not what I thought it was. I might start from scratch and do some research myself and look at some numbers and listen to some stories and the preconceived ideas that we all have, which have been passed down through generations as well, and our own experiences really do paint that picture. And we do tend to think that what we see is the same thing that other people see. It's not the case. Your circumstances and another person's circumstances, your competencies and another person's competencies, the things that you were born with that were built on that might enable one person to support themselves out of homelessness, whereas another person wouldn't have those same capabilities, but yet is no lesser just because they may need some more support or different support. It doesn't mean that just because you didn't need it doesn't mean that other people aren't entitled to it and shouldn't actually receive that support. Everybody should. It's kind of like saying, well, gosh, well, I don't have cancer, so why should anybody else have treatment for cancer? Or if I survive pneumonia, then everyone should survive pneumonia. It's just as ridiculous as that. Everybody's different.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's trying to instill that sort of empathy and understanding that everyone's situations are so different. And until you've gone through something personally, it is really tricky to have an opinion on it if it's not an educated opinion. Sky, I was hoping I could throw to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've obviously just started talking about that intersection of homelessness and domestic family violence. And I was wondering if you would be open to sharing a little bit about what that experience looked like for you personally.
Yes, thank you. My name is Sky, and I've dealt with family violence since I was a young child, which when I was 15, I moved out of home, getting a full-time job and never returning to my family. I had 2 children, single mother throughout my life, and eventually met a man who unfortunately took me away from my living private rental with my 2 children, and I wasn't to return. He wouldn't let me return there. So I lost my full-time job, which I had for 20 years. I lost my children and I lost my private rental. So from there, I wasn't allowed to leave without him. My money was gone to him. I wasn't allowed in contact with my children. I just pretty much disappeared off the face of the earth. A few years have passed, and I come to realise that I needed to get out for my life. I needed to escape, pretty much, the situation. So I did a lot of planning beforehand, tried a few times but backed off. But then eventually I got the courage when he fell asleep one night to organise for my car to be out instead of being trapped in, and quietly loaded some stuff up that I had because I'd lost all my stuff previously. And yeah, I took off. Thankfully, he didn't wake up. And then I was homeless. And I lived in my car for 9 months to a year. At the start of my homelessness, I had to go to the police because he had told me previously that he had tagged his ex's car with a tracker. So fortunately, I didn't have one on my car, but I didn't think of my phone. And he kept on finding me. I would wake up in my car with him parked against my door, all stuff like that. But just him drumming in over those years that I was worthless, no one would want me. So there was no point in me thinking that I could ask for help. So, yeah, 9 months going through a lady not having a shower. I started, unfortunately, stealing food because I had no money. It was quite hard and very, very scary, very scary.
Yeah, imagine.
But eventually, after that 9 months, I had decided that I couldn't keep on going the way I was. So I finally reached out to a place called Safe Steps. And thankfully, they helped me and took me in. So from there, I was going from women's refuges, different hotels, which were all not the safest places. Yeah.
Sky, thank you so much for sharing that, and your incredible bravery, and it takes so much courage to share that story, and I think it's so important that we are hearing these stories because that's just heartbreaking, and we need to put faces to these stories and what you've gone through. No one should have to go through that, and so thank you for your bravery and your courage today in sharing that story. And you've got some wonderful people in the room with you today, and so we're very grateful to have you on. Cara, I think I could see you sort of nodding along as well. I might throw to you. Do you have, can you tell us about some of the drivers, I guess, around that sort of gender-based violence, and what are we seeing on a national scale? Because unfortunately, Sky's story is not one that is in isolation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you so much, Donna and Guy. Hi, thanks for your courage in sharing that story and the leadership that you have in sharing that story on this platform as well. Yeah, I can talk generally about trends that we see, but these are like numbers, and I want everyone to be thinking about the people and the women and the stories like Sky at the center of what I'm talking about. But so when we look at sort of gender-based violence in Australia, and just to sort of clarify, we've talked a little bit about sort of more family and domestic violence and coercive control. They're all types of gender-based violence, but not all family and domestic violence is gender-based violence. It can be experienced by men, or it can be experienced in a non-gendered context. But a large part of gender-based violence experienced by women is family and domestic violence, or it is in their intimate partnerships. Not all, but a large part of it is. And what we know is that gender-based violence, it's not random. It's not because of an individual's decisions in a moment. It's patterned. And I'm not saying that for people not to be accountable, especially people perpetrating or using violence, but there are patterns behind it. And it's really driven by gender inequality and power imbalances that we experience at an individual level, but also manifest in our workplace. They manifest in our schools, in our universities, in our parliament, in the places where we see leaders. How rarely we see that many women leaders and diverse women leaders there. I know, like a previous prime minister a while ago said that not all disrespect ends in violence against women. But all violence against women starts with disrespect for women. And it really does run true. Like, it's a really simplistic way of summarizing very painful, long experiences, but it does run true. What we see in our research is that, when rigid gender stereotypes, so societies and communities that have really rigid gender stereotypes, you must be like this to be a man, you must be like this to be a woman. Men are better leaders just naturally because they're men. Women are better carers just because they're women. When we see men's control of decision making, and that can be, in the experience of Sky talking about her partner who would control her for her decision making, or it could be a courtroom full of men making a decision about a case, or it could be a boardroom full of men making a decision, a commercial decision. When that happens, when everyday sexism and disrespect is sort of accepted as normal, when we look at ways of blaming the victim rather than thinking about the perpetrator, those things are all little sort of clues that there will be higher rates of gender-based violence in Australia. In Australia, we know we've got pretty good national statistics from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And we know that if we look at women aged over 15, 1 in 3 women will experience physical assault in their lifetime. 1 in 5 will experience sexual violence. And I believe it's 1 in 4 will experience some form of violence from a current or former partner. We also know that intimate partner violence is the leading contributor to death, disability, and illness for Australian women aged 18 to 44. And we also know that domestic and family violence, as people have spoken about, remains the largest driver of homelessness for women and children in Australia. So sort of the national landscape shows these stories, just like Donna was saying, are coming out. They're no longer reliant on a journalist to write it in a paper. They are out. We are telling our own stories. We are hearing various stories. This is out. That's really changing public's perception that family and domestic violence and experiences of other forms of violence need to be hidden. They need to be ashamed. That is really changing. And we are seeing some changes in the experience of violence. Data that shows that the last 12 months prevalence is showing really promising signs. But for too many women, for too many people out there, too many families, it is the leading cause of harm, of illness, and homelessness. And we need to sort of keep working individually and collectively on what we can do to change.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about your home supposedly being your safe space, and for a lot of these women, this is the opposite. But
Yes.
does the alternative feel safer? And I think that's why we have a lot of people that feel trapped because they don't have those options. Where is safety for them? And I think we talk about the change in Australia. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of pressure on the Australian media as well. You see it these days to be reporting on these crimes and the language they use to shift the blame from the victim to the perpetrator.
Yes.
And how are we talking about this as a national issue? I think there's a lot of pressure on the media now to have responsibility in that space as well.
Yeah, we've got, we've been really lucky and we've worked very hard as well to be able to deliver a lot of training to journalists and editors to get them to understand what harmful reporting on family violence can do to the woman experiencing it when it's been a homicide for the family that's left. And, that is really important because the stories we hear through media, they really shape our attitudes and our understanding. So it's really promising to see media and media leaders actually leaning in and thinking about what is their responsibility and what is their responsibility to not only do better, but to make sure they're not doing more harm. Too often, it's the harm that even happens after the family violence incident, the harm of economic insecurity or homelessness or how the media is reported, that leaves very long-lasting damage on people's lives.
Yeah, so true. And I think, to talk about the education piece, and I want to thank everyone who's jumped on today because the individual responsibility we have is to better educate ourselves. And part of today's topic discussion is around the workplace, which we are all in very diverse and very different workplaces. And Cara, if I can sort of keep you on here, in line with this year's International Women's Day theme, which is balancing the scales, how do we see this sort of gender inequality showing up at the workplace? And then, how is it sort of presenting itself from that gender-based violence from the workplace and the home, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I wonder if I can just sort of touch on what you were talking about before, Natalie, when like your home is not a safe place. What is there for you when that is happening? And something that's really, really important, and something that all people working in workplaces, leaders, team leaders, any person of any influence they can do, is to make sure the workplace is a safe place. So if you're experiencing harm outside of the work, you come to work and you know that you will be believed if you share with your manager or a colleague that your life outside of work is unsafe, and that they will then think about how they can support you, whether that is through family and domestic violence leave, employee assistance programs, supporting you to continue to be employed, because that is so powerful. That is, self-determination. It is autonomy. It will ensure better economic outcomes in the long run. So anybody working in any workplace that is concerned about what they're hearing, the biggest thing that you can do is make sure that your workplace is a safe place for someone who's experiencing family and domestic violence. That doesn't mean you need to step in for the services that a shelter would provide, or the police or a counsellor. You don't need to be therapeutic, but there are very simple things that you can do that are, based in legislation, like family and domestic violence leave, and the culture that you create for safety for this to be disclosed, that can change your team members' lives and their lives of their children and their families around them. So coming back to workplaces as a place for gender inequality, unfortunately, we know that workplaces still unequal for women. Gender pay gap data just came out last week nationally, which shows, there is a consistent gender pay gap that is larger for some industries than others. And we know that as soon as a woman, has her first job, maybe even tertiary education, educated women, as soon as they step into their first graduate job, statistically, they are earning less than their peers. So there's lots of things that we can do around improving that, looking at your WGEA data if you're a leader, and sort of thinking about what you can do in that area. We also know that, unfortunately, sexual harassment is a type of harm that can happen in the workplace. So you might be thinking about your team members that are experiencing family and domestic violence outside of the workplace, but you also need to be thinking about harm that might be happening within your workplace. And I say this a lot to people. If you think you have 0 sexual harassment cases, your staff are not trusting the systems that you have in place. They are not coming forward because they don't think that reporting and sharing their story will lead to safer outcomes. They are self-protecting and keeping their story to themselves, and probably going to find a way to get away from the harm. So if you're a leader and you think, oh, we don't have a problem with sexual harassment, unfortunately, statistics show that it is prevalent and common in all our workplaces. So there's so much that we can do. And I think what I probably just will close off on this is to just not think about these things in isolation. Don't think about your gender pay gap or your gender equality or your flexibility things in isolation from the way that you support your staff who are experiencing family and domestic violence. And don't think about that in isolation from the way that you look at your role, your legislated positive duty to prevent harm around sexual harassment, because they're all connected. And when you connect these, you can just be a powerful, vehicle for change for your staff, for your business, and for their families and communities.
So many great points, Karen. I think one thing that I think that everyone can take away from this is no one's expecting anyone to be an expert on this subject matter or, be a counsellor. Actually, that's not what we want you to do at all. And we talk about that a lot in my role. And we talk about it from a complete well-being look. It's more about, do you have a culture where people can come and speak to you? And then do you have a cheat sheet of where to send people and who to refer people to? Because if you can do that, that's at a minimum, that's what everyone should feel comfortable doing. We're not expecting people to become experts and be able to handle these situations themselves, but they should have that lever of like, who do I put them in touch with and how can I best support them? and maybe in some of this follow up, we can give some a cheat sheet on some of the helpful websites and resources that are available for organisations to defer people to, because it's not always the leaders that catch these conversations as well, as we know. So it is a big responsibility that's felt by people, but we just want to make sure, again, everyone that's jumped on this call obviously is passionate about this topic. So how can we better sort of educate ourselves on what to do? Sky, I might throw it back to you if that's okay. We touched on your working situation and how you had that job from 15, and that was sort of one of the first things that was sort of taken away from you. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about those early days? How did that impact you in your work, and what did that look like?
With my work, when I was younger, I kind of did quite well. But as I got older in my life, that's when the mental health and all that started to get quite heavy with me. And with my work that I was working in, even though it was a big company, it was hard to open up to them and get a caring response. Even if I called in sick one day to be with my children or I couldn't make it, I would get in trouble for that. So even to call in sick, I was scared to do. So it was a lot of me in my life, even up to now, is just being scared, not feeling safe. But thankfully, since I found this job with the big issue, the women's workforce, it's been an absolute blessing, because I didn't think I could ever work again going through what I'd went through. But then thankfully it's such a safe space with just women. And my boss, Kirsty here, I'll walk into work and she'll ask me how I'm doing and I'll say, I'm fine. And then she'll go, no, how really are you doing? And she really cares. This whole big issue is a family and they care so much about each other. And it's just such a special thing to have, and not just to be a number in an environment where you give all your pretty much or 20 years to. So it's just such a gift being here, and I can talk to the women about anything that makes me feel unsafe, or my mental health. And it's been just an absolute gift. Yeah.
So I'm so, it's so wonderful to hear that. And I'm so happy for you that you have found that safe space, something that I think people take for granted. But really, to Kara's point, every workplace should feel like a safe space. We talk about Are You OK Day, and it shouldn't just be one day of the year that you actually ask someone how they are, and not just do it as a greeting, but actually mean it. And so it is so wonderful that you've found a space where you do feel safe, because no one likes to ask for help and no one wants to divulge everything that's going on in their life, but it does make it then difficult, because as you experience, you sort of then are getting even more scared to, go into a workplace that is a safe space, and your home's not a safe space. So it's a good reminder, as again, all of us who work in environments, that there's so much that might be happening in individuals' lives that we're just not actually aware about, and just taking that time and that empathy and making sure that we're all showing up at work and providing that safety for all of our employees, whether we're a manager or not.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Very important.
Yeah, again, thank you for sharing as well. And Donna, I haven't forgotten about you. I'd love to get you back on. Now, we know that the experience of domestic family and violence doesn't discriminate, sadly, and that victim survivors are working right across workplaces in Australia. And we often wouldn't even know. You've worked very closely with a lot of women who are experiencing this. Can you share a little bit about how that might be showing up in the workplace and some of the experiences that you've come across?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to jump back to a point that Kara made before as well, about the media. It's that good bloke narrative that's changed now. It's not a footy hero. his wife is dead. It's, we're now, we're changing the language. But if you look at the media, you'll see that they'll still say, homeless man did this, homeless woman did that. And the fact that the person was experiencing homelessness had zero to do with the situation. But watch how it changes your opinion. Oh gosh, that means that person's dangerous then. So just jumping back to that point, because it really is a key point. It's there's one word that really sums up homelessness. I've experienced homelessness myself many years ago, and one of the things that surprised me, unfortunately, was that nothing had changed as far as services and support goes when I started working in this area back in about 2014. Chaotic. It is chaotic. There is never going to be a day that's going to run smoothly. You don't ever have anywhere to go to put your feet up, and when you get home from work, you don't have anywhere to get ready for work. You don't have any clean clothes to wear. You might not have had the opportunity to have a shower for a long time. And these are the ways that now that we're having these conversations about homelessness, and that it does show up in the workforce. What we know is that the statistics are showing us that there has been quite a significant rise in the number of people working full-time and experiencing homelessness. So homelessness itself sort of sits in a number, and there's all these little buckets that it's made up of. But when you look at working homeless, that number is actually going up. So what is going to happen is that it is more than likely happening to somebody that you work with, or it will happen to that person. One of the biggest things that one of the biggest changes that we had across the world, of course, was COVID. And when COVID happened, all of the things that we said we couldn't do, we suddenly could do. We were able to start working flexible hours. We were able to start working from remote locations. We were able to start having meetings over Zooms and webinars over Zoom. I worked for quite a few federal government agencies, and had floated some of these ideas to them a few years ago, and it was all, no, people they just won't go to work, and everyone will get lazy. And when you have to find a way, you find a way. One of the things that we know with homelessness is that it is an experience, a very chaotic experience. Time is one of the commodities that is no longer a luxury for people. They have so many more appointments. There are appointments with doctors, with nurses, with lawyers, with schools, with probation officers, with all sorts of different people, and that encroaches on their work time. So what we're asking people to do, what we're asking workplaces to do, is use your resources within your organisation to create situations that will enable your employee to stay at work. If their job has time critical and mission critical tasks, see if there are other things that they can do. Because for someone to stay in employment means that they can generally get themselves back into private rental, because public housing and social housing is absolutely non-existent. But if a person can keep their job, it is going to mean that they'll fare much better, and they'll be able to exit homelessness more on their terms. I think it's really important language matters. It's really important to say to people who may be in this situation, let me show you some of the things that we can offer you, rather than tell me what you need. Because they don't know what they need. When you're in that crisis situation, someone says, what do you need? You might start to feel needy. You might start to feel like you're a burden. You'll start to feel like, oh gosh, now I've got to let everybody know the intricacies of what's going on in my life. But if you're the team leader or the manager, one of the things as an organisation that's really important to do, and Cara mentioned it as well, is to look at the services around where your workplace is, but also ask those services, where might an employee go if they don't live in that area? So if it's a housing support, or food support, clothing support, counselling, support for school supplies, you name it. You as an organisation should have a list of what is available, what organisations, who to call. If that person's too scared to go home that night and says, I just don't know if I can go home, like this is happening. Sorry, there's a cat jumping on my keyboard. It's really important now as organisations knowing that homelessness is in your workplace. I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that if someone comes to us, that we have resources available. Things like, are there showers available in the building that person can use? Perhaps a locker to keep a spare change of clothes in. A room where they can make personal phone calls, where they won't be within earshot of others if they have to make some very private calls. Also, one of the big things that we noticed, we ran a shop called the Carla Space where we only employed women experiencing homelessness. And what we did was we removed the biggest barrier, and that was start and finish times. And we're not talking about flex times. We removed the actual the requirement to come to work. But people were still able to keep their job. So people were given a certain amount of hours per week that they could work on certain days, so we didn't have everyone coming in on a Monday or a Tuesday. But if they didn't get to work that day, there was no penalty for it. I didn't need a medical certificate. I didn't need a reason. All I would say I'd just send people a text and just say, I hope you're okay. Let me know when you might be in next. And what would happen is at the start of homelessness and the chaos, we would find that people were not able to make it in very often. But as they were able to stabilise things and they were able to make appointments without fearing losing their job or having to make up excuses or lies and make themselves feel even worse, they were able then to have more control of what was actually happening in that chaos and keep it a little bit more stable. And then it's always easy to get a job when you've got a job. So then what happened was every single employee that we had through the Carla Space ended up going on to full-time work afterwards. Nobody actually ended up back on the streets or ended up back in unemployment. I've got probably 1,000 other notes and a cat trying to get on the table, and I've probably spoken for 20 minutes already. So I'll leave it at that for now, but yeah, if you have any questions, fire away.
Donna, I just love that model because you're sort of giving them like these people a purpose and you're helping rebuild their confidence. And I think you just touched on that then. It's so much easier, to go and get a new job. I mean, that goes for anyone, right? When you're feeling confident, you're feeling valued, you're feeling like you're giving back and you've got that purpose. So such a, I guess, important model because it's not just about, you're not just providing charity for someone, you're actually giving them a purpose to come along and feel that again, and that self-worth, which I think work does give a lot of people. And I think I love that the model is sort of meeting them where they are as well. So not expecting them to fit into the rigid times in the box because that just adds that pressure on them as well. And I think I just want to touch on something else you said about the language matters. What do you need? We talk about this a lot with mental load. I think women in general, right? Like we don't want to be asked how can we help? We get it at home all the time. But again, that kind of ties back to that point of we're not expecting employers or to know all the answers, but they should know at least where to direct people and have some information in their tool belt that allows them to sort of provide that support, because that question, what do you need? As you mentioned, straight away puts it back onto that person to share or feel like they're burdening or feel like they have to divulge more information. So such an important point. And I think that model is just so, such a wonderful initiative. So well done.
Thank you.
Tara, I might throw it back to you. We know that many victims and survivors remain in the mainstream workplaces while they're experiencing domestic and family violence. We've talked about that today. And unfortunately, a lot of people just wouldn't even be aware of how many people are actually showing up to work and dealing with this at home. We've touched on some of the sort of practicalities of what workplaces could do. Is there any more that you think that we as workplaces, because if the workplace itself has never experienced it, it's, as we've said, it's not because it's not happening. It's just that maybe we've not created a safe space, or yeah, maybe it hasn't happened yet. But how can workplaces or individuals on this call sort of take some really actionable steps after this?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think it's really similar. And sorry, I'm having a bit of IT issues, so just let me know if I lose you or anything. I think it's really similar to what Donna was saying around like, you know, you can't assume that no one in your team is experiencing homelessness. Um, you need to assume that the domestic and family violence is present in your team. Might not be at the moment, it might be in the past, but you need to be really aware of that because, you know, statistically, it most likely is, especially if you're, you know, a medium to large workplace. I I think like just sort of building on everything that has been said, like the fundamental thing that needs to happen first is you believe and listen. If you are trusted so much for someone to share the um, the unsafe situation that they're in, all you need to do is listen first. And when they, because that is just incredibly powerful and levels on your own understanding and attitude. You've said, and so has Donna and Sky, like understanding what your role is, not to give clinical advice. Please don't do that. You need to thank the person for sharing and say that there is help available and then share that information. I think it's really helpful to can ask the person, what is a safe way for me to share this information with you, especially in remote teams. Yeah, remote teams, it's so complicated how to make sure, you know, if someone is coming forward and sharing this with you and they are working from their home, because we have so many remote teams now, it's really important that you do that. So that's sort of like how to support the individual. Workplaces, look, I think we need to create a culture where
might be losing you a little bit there, Cara.
Hold people back. So you need a culture that understands that family and domestic violence happens, that it's not the person's fault who is experiencing that. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. We might, yeah, I might just jump in, Cara, just because we've just sort of lost you a little bit. It's breaking up. But I'm going to pick up about what you said about the individual. And I think the listening and getting permission as well. If someone does share this with you, you need to get permission from them on what they're comfortable with you doing with that information, because that also is a huge, you know, they've trusted you with that information. And I think that's really important to note. And I think you started to talk about what a company can do, and we're not sort of, I think sometimes we let you know, perfect get in the way of progress. You don't need to sit here and roll out a policy straight away to address this in your organization. It's as simple as, educating internally that this is something that we should be more aware of, understanding the levers and the resources that are available, and then creating a culture where leaders are open to listening. I think we've got you back, Cara. Oh, no, now the mic's not working. Maybe hold that thought. Sky, if I can throw it to you one more time, and you've talked about how wonderful, you've obviously got some incredible women in the room with you, and and you've touched on some of the ways that, Kirsty's even helped you since you've been there. Is there anything else that you think that people on this call could walk away with, and steps that they could take to just have that sort of approach and build that environment that you're currently experiencing?
The thing I like to say to people, to women, that I felt so deeply that it was weak to ask for help. Whereas now I know, and I've been told so many times, that it's such a strength. So even if you do feel so weak, just know that it's really strong of you to reach out and ask for help. And then when you ask for that first help, then the help just starts to roll on. And it really does. Things start to come to you, like this wonderful person here. And yeah.
It's vice versa. But can I just say, Donna mentioned several things about, providing places for people to make phone calls and things like that. I don't know if you realise that if you're trying to get into some crisis accommodation, you might have to call 4 or 5 times a day. That's not something you want to do, maybe out on your main floor thing. They're really important things that you can provide. There's simple things like websites like Ask Easy that will give you instant information on who's got housing, who's got food, and those sort of things compared to where you are. But I think most of all, just be ready to listen and be in tune. And if you know your staff, you'll know when something's not quite right too. So use your intuition. And I know when the girls walk in, and I'm really lucky, I've got 18 of these girls part of our women's workforce program here at the Big Issue. I can always tell when something's not quite right, and we deal with it, don't we, Sky? But Sky's an amazing person, and she probably didn't, go too much into it. But, her job that she was at for 20 years, she just walked away. He took her away. She's never, ever been back. She never goes near there, nothing like that. So, that was a 20-year career gone, and she can't put that on her resume, or, well, she could, but, you can't just call for a reference and things like that. So just little things that,
Yeah, honestly, and yeah, Scott, again, I can't thank you enough for sharing this, and to your point about it's not a weakness, it's a strength. But it's hard when you're in that. I imagine when you're in that, you're going through that at the time. That's probably not how you feel, and so again, we talk about how important conversations and stories like yours are, and how thankful we are, because it just brings to light and emphasizes the importance of that education piece and putting faces and stories to this, and it's not just this hidden issue that we don't think about. Cara, you think you're good now?
Don't want to jinx myself.
It wouldn't be a Zoom if we didn't have someone on mute or something.
Can you hear me okay now? So it's
yes,
clear.
yep. Yes, I'll throw you. Yeah, so if you're going to go to the last sort of tips, and then I'll throw to Donna, because of course this conversation's been so great, but we are running out of time.
Beautiful. Look, I'll keep it simple, because I think that Sky's actually said a lot of the things that I've sort of had in there, but from her own experience. So I think, first, think about safety and victim-centered systems. Don't build your response as a workplace around compliance, but actually about what the experience will be for a team member to come forward and share what they're saying. That's a really brave thing that they're doing, and you need to make sure that that is really, really a positive and safe experience for them. So no proof of requirements, have many safe disclosure pathways. It might quite often will be to a colleague or a peer, not necessarily to manager, not necessarily the HR, and confidentiality must be explicit, both for family and domestic violence and sexual harassment as well. I think you need to train your leaders and your managers around what they need to do. Again, it doesn't need to be overly complex. They need to believe, they need to listen, and then they need to refer. And then they need to do what they can to keep that person in work. That's business continuity planning. It's not that someone's not doing their job. You're making sure that someone else is doing the job that they can't do because of their life circumstances, but they have that job to come back to when they're ready for it. So if it's a reduction of hours or a change of duties, any of those things. Make work a stabilizing force. So make work that safe space if the harm is happening outside of work. It's, what Donna was speaking about, it's what was speaking about, like, anything that can keep someone, if they choose to stay in work, working during a transition of leaving a abusive relationship is really, really important. I think look at your compliance and then go further. So look at positive duty obligations under respect at work, and then actually look at what that means for your own business, for your own culture, for your own, values proposition. How does it come to life? How are you going to lead in this way that's authentic? And lastly, build cultures where people feel safe to seek help and to speak up. We do that a lot around OH&S. We do it a lot around workplace safety. It's very similar with some nuance and some safety and a bit of, extra consideration. But, if you've got that environment, you're going to actually have a more stable workforce, a more productive workforce, a workforce that really values being part of your team. And I know that many leaders are looking for that at the moment and in this day and age. So I just want to close off with, like, workplaces can be the safe space for someone to seek help and to gain, like, they can't be the silver bullet. I'm not saying that you don't have to fix everything, but do what you can to make it a safe space, because it can help someone stay employed, it can help someone stay housed, and it help them stay safe as well. Thanks,
Cara. I loved that where you said the listen, believe, refer. I mean, that's like, if you take nothing else away from that's like some easy three things to remember. Donna, finally, I'll throw to you and your cat if they're still around. Do you have any final advice, takeaways that workplaces, individuals on this call can sort of go and action after this?
I think one of the important things to remember is that homelessness it's growing, it's becoming part of everyday life. We're seeing it in the workforce now, but we do not want it to become the norm. We want it to be something, we don't want it to become the status quo, we don't want it to become acceptable. We need for it to go back the other way, but we all need to band together to do that. And you need to do that by making those conversations at work, like having those conversations so people can stay employed. So those people with the lived experience, like Sky, you're an absolute rock star. You really are. I'm in awe of you. People with the lived experience who are now speaking up, those people can go to their local members of parliament and demand the change, because they are the ones who can say, I know what it's like in the system. You can stand up there in front of the cameras and you can say it's like this, but it isn't, it's like that. And I know because I was just there. So we need to give people power, give people voices, and keep those wraparound services available to them. And we can't do that if we can't find people, if we lose them out of the workforce, if we lose people, if we lose contact with people. We need to keep people, we need to keep those channels open and really stay with the person on the journey as much as you can, and be there for them when they get through the other end of it. Go and see your members of parliament when it's election year, when it's not an election year, but at any time. We are people who will make the change, and we absolutely must speak out about this. We cannot let this become normal.
So many great points there, Donna. I think there's so many takeaways. I know we've run out of time. We've had some questions come through. One of the questions was about one of our participants hadn't heard about women's workforce. So I think we'll make sure we include that in some of the takeaways. We are going to have a short info pack that's sent out to everyone here with some of the references and the resources, because I think if there's anything that you take away from today, every single person on this call has the opportunity and maybe the responsibility to at least ask the question of, what do we have in place at our workplace? Is there anything I can do as an individual? And at a bare minimum, believe, listen, refer, as Cara said. But there'll be some great resources that we can refer back to anyway. And I just wanted to thank Donna, Cara, Sky, Kirsty as well. Thank you so much for attending this panel. I mean, gosh, I'd love to have this panel not even exist in a few years' time. Wouldn't that be a wonderful place that we're not even having to talk about this? But thank you. Around International Women's Day, it's really important that we bring light to these really difficult topics and conversations, and they are uncomfortable, but we need to bring them up more and talk more about it and educate more. And Sky, particularly, thank you so much for your vulnerability today and your bravery, because honestly, to Donna's point, you know, the willingness for you to share just makes this conversation so much more important and impactful, because it's a face and it's a real story, and we can't hide behind the numbers, as Cara talked about as well. But thank you for everyone who jumped on and joined us. Really appreciate it, and it was my great pleasure to sit down with some wonderful women on this call. But that's all from us today, and keep an eye out from your email. I think there's a quick survey as well, so please give us feedback. Otherwise, have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.